Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the session on personal leadership, and it's presented by Dr. Colin Hughes. In this session, Colin will focus on the role of leadership in our lives with a particular emphasis on building trust. This session is informed by both academic and industry research and will outline the key facets of personal leadership. Colin will give us some useful takeaways to help build leadership, including a model of building trust, and we'll be asked to reflect on our own leadership credentials and capacities. As delegates, we're also encouraged to ask questions using the questions and answers functionality. Colin will speak for about 20 minutes and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. I'll now hand you over to Colin. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Angela, and good morning, everyone. Or it's nearly the afternoon, and thanks for the invite to speak to you here today. As Angela said, my name is Colin Hughes, and my session is really focused on personal leadership and trust. And just by way of a quick introduction, so I head up our graduate business school in TU Dublin, and I see one of my colleagues, Dave Kilmartin, was on the session just before. So always a tough act to follow. I've been 10 plus years in leadership roles within the Faculty of Business, and I suppose before that was heavily involved, not just lecturing, but also in a range of kind of executive education management roles. And really that type of, I suppose, early stage experience got me really interested in the area of leadership, and particularly in the area of trust and the role that trust plays in creating high performance cultures, and the role that trust plays in effective leaderships, both of which are of course linked. So that, I suppose, really spurred me on to do a PhD where I examined leadership and trust in virtual teams. So this was far before COVID, but obviously virtual teams and virtual leadership is quite common at the moment. But I looked at, I suppose, 3 global technology companies, and I was really trying to get underneath what modern effective leadership looks like, and the role that virtual piece has, and the role, of course, that trust has. So what I'd like to do today really is to share some insights from my experience, from my own research, from this research and other research, and also from, I suppose, a significant body of research and literature on both leadership and trust, and to hopefully give you a couple of things to take away with you today, and I'll summarize that in kind of 3 key takeaways at the very end. What I've been doing lately, I suppose, is really trying to disseminate my thinking around leadership and trust. And I think for anyone that follows the kind of Edelman research will see that we have a leadership deficit and a trust deficit across many pillars of our society, including within organizations and businesses and so on. And so this discussion is a really important one to have. And what I kind of dedicate a lot of my time to is kind of, speaking in companies to everything from graduate programs to senior teams, and to, I suppose, publishing some work and book chapters and things around leadership and trust and virtual working and so on, and conferences, and then kind of blog posts and newspaper articles and things like that, to really get this discussion going. And I'm passionate about leadership and trust, and I think they're areas that we can all continue to work on and do better on. The first thing I want to start with today really is, and the first takeaway I want for you is, I know that there's a mixed audience here. I know some people have, people management responsibilities. A lot of people don't. The first thing I want to say to you is, there's a lot kind of written around leadership, and a lot of people assume straight away that leadership is limited to those with a specific leadership title or role. And I kind of want to debunk that from a start here today, and really ask the question, which I ask to people a lot when they're going for roles, either internally or externally, that I might kind of work with to help them prep. Are you going to lead now, or are you going to wait for a leadership position before you show leadership? So leadership for me isn't about the role. Leadership is really about the ability to influence others towards a specific outcome. So that would be my simple definition of leadership. And if you look at really famous kind of leadership quotes from Warren Bennis. Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So leads by example. And leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he or she wants to do it. Now, it's assumed all the time, and having, a picture of a general there and stuff assumes people in leadership positions, but these quotes don't mention someone having to be in a position of authority. And actually, many of the modern leadership theories talk about leading beyond authority. And they talk about this whole notion of distributed leadership. The notion that not only in a high performing sports team, but a high performing team in any sense, including within careers, that you would have leaders across the team, people that are able to influence the positive outcomes, influence towards this vision for what careers could be in your particular college or university. So really having that sense of what we need to do and ensuring that you have people right across the team that are going to stand up and lead. Because this is a picture of the Ireland team that beat the All Blacks for the first time. That team wouldn't have had that achievement without leaders right across that panel, across that greater kind of organization. You can't, leadership doesn't rest on the shoulders of one individual. And in your roles, I suppose it's really interesting to think if leadership's about influence, well, who do I have to influence on a day-to-day? So you've colleagues and team members, you've lecturers. So how do you work more closely with academic staff to make sure that their careers is absolutely embedded, within what we're doing and what we're trying to create here and what we're trying to produce? The students themselves, the leaders across the wider organization, employers, and other external stakeholders. So again, how do we go about influencing those people by showing that leadership? And if you look at leadership theories, and I've just captured the main ones here, if you like, 12 leadership theories, which you'll be glad to know I'm not going to go through. But if you look at many of the modern ones, I mentioned distributed leadership, authentic leadership, level 5 leadership, Jim Collins, which is about humility, servant leadership, this notion that you're really there to serve and help others. A lot of these newer leadership theories are focused on this idea of building relationships, showing humility, developing these softer skills that I'll come to a little bit later, but that we really need to be developing within our students, within our graduates. But really, when you look at leadership theories, and for those of you that read anything about them, or if your own experience working with people in leadership positions, or your own coming to events like this and so on, my view would be that you create your own leadership mosaic. And this comes from work on cultural identity, where they talk about cultural identity isn't just about the country you're from. It's about a bunch of different tiles that include your profession and what part of the country you're from. If you're from a coastal region versus a mountainous region versus an inland, if you have certain interests in sports and hobbies and different things, everyone has a different cultural identity, which is made up by a bunch of these small little tiles that make up that mosaic. For me, leadership is the same thing. You take bits and pieces, you figure out what combination makes your leadership mosaic up, and you work on that on a continuous basis. And that's what we all must do. And that quote that's attributed to Oscar Wilde about, be yourself, that everyone else is taking. I've no idea if Oscar Wilde ever said that. I doubt he did. But that's a good example of this. Don't try and you can try and emulate in some way, the positive things that people do, but you have to be yourself, and you have to have a form of leadership style that you're comfortable with. And if you cut through all of those leadership theories and you look at, in the words of Jack Welch, the former CEO and chairman of General Electric, and I use him because he's such a kind of has been such a hard-nosed kind of business person, and a ruthless leader. They call him Neutron Jack because he was so ruthless and commercial in many ways. And there's an interesting video, and he talks about leadership being about two words. It's about truth and it's about trust. And he basically says, all of that other stuff around leadership, the books, and it's all crap. It's all just about truth and trust. So if you have truth and you have trust, you can get so much more done. And Stephen Covey kind of echoes that work. He talks about this notion of leadership, this ability to establish, grow, and repair trust being the key leadership competency of the new global economy. Because what he sees is that leadership is a lubricant within relationships. where there's trust, you actually get things done. You can operate really quickly. So trust is that lubricant. Um, so for the purpose of today, really, I've narrowed down on, trust being the defining element of high performance leadership, be it as an individual contributor or as a people manager or whatever your role is, that if you can build strong, high trust relationships with the various people you interact with, well, then ultimately you'll be able to influence people, and you'll be able to create change and achieve that vision that you have or that your team has for your department or your team. So trust in an essence and in a short kind of definition, it's simply a willingness to be vulnerable to another person based on positive expectations. So what does that vulnerability look like? Well, a lady called Nicole Gillespie's done a bit of work in this, and she basically says, the proof of trust really in terms of trusting someone is when you rely on them or when you disclose something to them. So and so when someone relies on you for something, or if they disclose information to you, speak openly with you, that's a fairly good indication that they trust you. But there's been a lot of research in the social sciences, and more recently in neuroscience, a guy called Paul Zak has done a fair bit of work on this, around this whole notion of a reciprocal nature, that you give trust to get trust, and that very act of taking that first risk by showing that vulnerability, by being open or by delegating something, actually creates a huge amount of trust in return. And my own research bears that out very, very strongly, where people talked about, someone delegating work to me, he's trusting me to do it. I really need to make sure I'm successful for him because he's putting his faith in me. Or in disclosure, the leader told us, our team, our group, what they wouldn't tell other people publicly. So again, that built trust. So in order, sometimes taking the first step is really important in building a high trust relationship. And that's not just for people managers, that's just for colleagues, working with people, working for stakeholders, and so on. So that's the second kind of key takeaway I want to give you. The first one really is that leadership isn't about, I have to wait till I'm in a management role to show leadership. Everyone can show leadership, and in fact, everyone must show leadership if we're to be successful. The second key point is take that leap and give trust in order to get trust. Now, do that in a sensible way, obviously, but give trust to get trust, because just that very act of trusting can completely change the dynamic of relationships and build a level of trust that just kind of builds and builds in a cyclical manner from there. So that's number two. So a basic model of trust is this willingness to be vulnerable. It's an attitude or it's a psychological state, and that leads to trusting behavior. So I'll, disclose something or rely on someone for something. But what is it that informs that attitude or that psychological state of trust? It's there's a number of things, but for today we'll just focus on one, and that's really how trustworthy you perceive the other person to be. So what I'm going to kind of finish with is a very small model of trust. What I want you to think about as we go through this is not only how do you measure other people, but how do others measure you? Because every relationship that you're a part of, someone is determining your trustworthiness as well as you determining their trustworthiness. And that's worth reflecting on. So this ABI model was developed by Roger Mayer and his colleagues in 1995 in a seminal paper on trust. And it talks about ability, benevolence, and integrity as these three foundations for trustworthiness. So, and this is the third thing I want to take you away, for you to take away today. It's a very simple model, and I'm going to give you kind of a reflective exercise at the end that you can look at. So let's have a quick run through them. Ability is that group of skills or competencies, characteristics to enable a party to have an influence with somebody else. So these people that we think as high performing, really capable, really able, and so on. And the question to reflect on is, are you an expert in your area, or could you do more? So are you absolutely an expert when you're talking to students about, what they can expect when they go to job interviews? Do you know what the questions have been? Do you keep in touch with the contacts within industry and so on? Do you know when you're talking to academics that you partner with, that you work with, as in, trying to influence some of the programs and the modules and so on? Do you know exactly these soft skills and graduate attributes and things like that people need? Are you absolutely on top of your area? And I'm sure most of you absolutely are. And then do you have a vision for careers in your institution? So do you have a vision for what careers could be? The second one is benevolence. And benevolence was about that personal degree of kindness towards somebody else and a genuine concern for their welfare and well-being. And Google did a really interesting study a number of years ago where they looked at all of their high-performing teams and they tried to figure out what the silver, the magic bullet was, if you like. And they found that managers of teams who express interest and concern for team members' success and personal well-being outperformed others in the quality of their work. So that benevolence was at the heart of high-performance teams. And that's come through in my own research as well, very strongly when we talk about what I found is that employees value leaders who are people managers who are employee centric. They're focused on developing them and growing them. So if you look at this kind of notion of in your role, what you're doing is essentially growing future leaders, future people that are going to go out there and have really successful careers, really successful lives, people that are trying to find the right occupations and the things that go into to start them out on a good path. So that's a really valuable work that everyone involved in on this call does on a daily basis. But how do you build benevolence with employers, and how do you show not only students that you want the best for them and that you're advising them well, but from an employer's point of view, how do you understand their pain points and what they need? Are you very tuned into that they see that you're really helping and you really have a care for what they need in their individual roles? And then from a colleague's point of view, I mentioned this employee-centric leadership, but this isn't just for people that, that manage on different levels. This is across the board. This is the notion of showing empathy and understanding and benevolence towards our colleagues, because that builds relationships at all levels. And I've mentioned soft skills a couple of times, and I actually hate soft skills as a word. And I heard recently at someone talking about soft power, which I actually loved, because I think I was at an educational conference a number of years ago, and a futurologist spoke at it, really interesting guy. And he talked about, he put it to us as the audience, a group of people from business schools. He said, if your graduates aren't able to differentiate themselves from robots, from machines into the future, they'll end up working for robots if they work at all. And really what he was talking about is, how do you go about differentiating from things like AI and machine learning and things like this? And really at the root cause of a lot of that is soft power, right? It's that ability to build relationships, it's benevolence, it's integrity, it's all of these things that we can build. It's all of these really crucial skills. So they're not just important for us from a personal leadership point of view, they're really important that as colleges of higher education institutions, that we're actually producing graduates that are equipped with these skills that are really going to matter. And the third one, the final one, is integrity. So do you come across as open? Do you share information willingly with people? Openness in my study was one of the single most important things for building trust. When people speak openly with you, you feel trusted, you feel that they're trustworthy in return, and that generates cycles of open conversations. And interestingly, a number of critical incidents in my study where trust was low at the start, because people had open conversations and highlighted and brought those issues to the table, well, then they became really high performing, really high trust relationships. So trust can absolutely be rebuilt and repaired. And there's the talk that it can't be. It depends what the breach is, obviously, but it can be absolutely. And I found that very strongly in my study. Do your actions match your words? There's a big thing around behaviour and integrity. So do you all the time under promise or over promise and under deliver because you're too busy or whatever reason? Something I've been guilty of in the past. Or do you actually, are you consistent in actually meeting the behaviors that you've set out and meeting the deadlines and coming back to people? And do you display values that others can relate to? So that might be honesty, it might be discreetness if someone shares a piece of information with you or whatever it might be. So integrity is a fundamental kind of thing around trust. So you have ability, your expertise and your ability to do something so that people feel comfortable delegating a piece of work to you or trusting a piece of work to you. Do you show benevolence so that people feel that you really care about them and that you actually have their interests in at heart? And do you show integrity? Do you have the openness and the values and the behavioral integrity that people will feel comfortable trusting you? So what I'd like you to do is take this away, and this is a short little tool where you can look at ability, benevolence, and integrity, and you can reflect on a relationship or either with an individual or a team, and you can say, well, how would they rate me on this? And what stops me achieving a higher number? And then what will you do to improve this? So if I take benevolence, like, the care and concern piece. So if I see, sometimes reflecting on this myself, sometimes new colleagues come into the university, and it's a really different place. They haven't worked in the university before, and I try and meet them for a coffee and that type of thing. But do I do that enough? That's the question. So I probably fall down on that a little bit. Or from an integrity point of view, I probably promise things and then become too busy and don't deliver. Now for me, that's like, oh, I didn't get to deliver. It's not a big deal. I'll deliver it again. For them, that could be a huge deal, because that sends all sorts of signals about how you're prioritizing them. And then what will you do to improve this? And really, in doing that, you can reflect on a couple of the other things outside of trustworthiness in some ways that actually that will impact people's trust in you. And that's personal differences. So some people are just more inclined to trust others. So they have a higher disposition or propensity to trust. So some relationships simply need more time. And you can be doing all the right things, but you might need to do them a little bit longer before you break through. That's a personality thing built on an internal thing built on experience and so on. And third parties play a huge role on relationships that you have with other people. In my study in my PhD study, about 95% of the employees that I interviewed had reached out to somebody to ask them about the manager that was about to interview them for a role. About 95% of them, I think it was all bar one or something, had done that. So that's incredible when you think about that manager's reputation then preceded them. And sometimes, in some cases, they had done that for previous roles and decided not to go for the roles because of what they heard back. In other cases, it helped them start a relationship in a very strong way. So remember, the individual relationships you have can impact all sorts of different relationships in time. So it's really important to reflect on how trustworthy you're perceived to be. But the one thing, apart from those external influences, that I'd say is the impact of behavior is stronger than any other antecedent. So, if someone isn't, has a low trusting disposition, you'll break through eventually with those good behaviors. And once you build up enough kind of trust in that bank, for the times that you err a little bit or you make a small mistake, which we all do, right? You have enough goodwill, you have enough trust built up that the relationship can survive that. It's when you don't have enough trust built up and you make an error or whatever, that's where trust can be very difficult then to develop. So a recap. I started by saying that leadership isn't about a role, it's about influencing people towards a specific outcome. So this leading beyond authority, being able to lead and be able to have leaders right across your team, this notion of distributed leadership. And the three things I suppose to take away are: one, this leadership isn't just about the leadership positions. Two, give trust to get trust, because that can really, taking that first step can start this cycle. And three, use this ABI model to help you build trust with others. Okay, so I know we're limited enough on time, so let me just kill my slides and come back into the room there. Okay.
That's great. Colin, thanks a million. That was excellent. I was very fortunate to hear your presentation that you presented to the heads of service earlier on in the year. So there's lots to pick up there. We don't have any questions, but we do have one or two coming in. But just say you've certainly given us lots to think about. Your passion for leadership definitely comes across. I love the slide you had on, I suppose, leadership is the ability for others to influence others towards a specific outcome. And I suppose the importance that everyone should show leadership, the two, things, give trust to get trust. It sounds so simple, but so important, and leadership.
Angela, I might just address, there's one comment there just about images. Images of females, and apologies, I suppose the Jack Welch one is a particular quote, right? A well-known quote. And the other one, I suppose the piece around, I was using the example of the Irish rugby team, so that's just as a thing, as a personal interest. So that's why I highlighted Joe Schmidt. So, but that is an oversight for me, really, because I was actually only on a great session last week with Sport Ireland about leadership, and talking to a couple of female leaders out there about some of the huge achievements and accomplishments. So that's probably an oversight from my point of view. So apologies for that. That's something that I'll have a look at. We're always learning.
No problem. And thanks for that question, Patsy, and thanks, Colin. So two more, just while we're waiting there, came in. You know, in raising up other leaders, what do you look for in younger leaders? You know, what do we look for in younger leaders?
Yeah, I mean, like, and this is an interesting one. And for those of you who are interested, there's a very good podcast at the moment. It's a high performance podcast, and it interviews people in from sporting backgrounds, from business backgrounds, a couple of really strong female CEOs, actually, just for the earlier point, Joe Malone, amongst others, and really looks at what their leadership journey and so on. And I've been reflecting on a lot of that on my own experience, and I think, like, I kind of look for that willingness to be open to experiences, and a willingness to be open in conversations is really crucial for me, because I think if you're open-minded and you're also open in terms of what you're willing to share, I think you actually get to the root cause of so many issues, and you actually get things on the table that you're able to actually work through things. And I think in speaking openly, the brainstorming and the things comes very naturally, where we can really get to grips with where we're going, what that vision should be, and what it should look like. And I think without the vision, it's very hard to bring people towards the vision if you don't know what the vision is. So I think that openness in that passion for learning and finding out more, and passion for sharing, I think, are two of the key things that I would really look for.
Okay, and we've just two more questions. Colin, do you think what would be your advice to increase leadership skills in young people?
Yeah, I suppose one of the first things I always start with, and I introduced a leadership module on a second year undergraduate program a couple of years ago, and people said, "Oh, well, leadership isn't like you shouldn't be covering leadership with second years; they're too young." And like my question was, well, why are they too young? Leadership is a life skill. It's not something around you wait till you become a CEO before you become a leader. That's ridiculous in my mind. So it's really about getting them to reflect on their own experiences, and they have a lot of that through part-time work, through their involvement in sports or other activities. And what do they see as leadership, and not just in the organization, but from a societal point of view? We all need to have a stronger, I suppose, leadership responsibility within society. What can we do as individuals to help people? And partly we do that by producing hopefully socially responsible graduates who are going to do great things for the world, but there's a lot more we can keep on doing. So I think giving them those experiences, those leadership experiences at an early age, and really getting them to reflect deeply on their type of leadership and the areas that they need to develop and work on. So things like public speaking, and things like team working, and a lot of the things that the soft power things that we mentioned earlier, I think are particularly interesting.
Great. And Colin, is there a link between personality type and effective leadership and outcomes, do you think?
Well, interesting. Some of the earlier stuff on leadership talked about this kind of great man theory, and again, that's what it was called, and trait theory around, great leaders have particular traits, and not everyone can be a great leader. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of them things were about this notion of the really gregarious, kind of outgoing, confident leader who was an excellent orator and all these type of things. And a guy called Jim Collins wrote a book years ago, and he basically said, I want to figure out what the secret sauce is for organizations that are transcending their industries and their competitors over a sustained period. And they set out hoping it wouldn't be leadership. But the answer they got back that it was leadership. And in many cases, those organizations that were successful over the longer term had CEOs that nobody had ever heard of. They were people that were hugely humble. There were people that were very focused on their employees first, above themselves. And it's those skills, that humility and that kind of servant leadership type thing. And they were very authentic people. They were the skills that made them effective leaders. So people sometimes have a view that a leader looks like a particular individual or has a certain kind of characteristics, whereas that kind of, debunked that myth in large parts.
Okay, Colin, I know there's some more questions, but I'm just conscious of the next speaker, and Dave Camartin will be coming in. So on behalf of the conference and our colleagues here, thank you very much, Colin, for presenting and sharing your knowledge and